I'll be real. Like a lot of times it said like, I can't stand, or I even hate people, like it just, people annoy me or statements like that. And then coming back from this orientation or this yoga retreat, it's just like filled with this like newfound love for existence and for human beings. And it started to fill me with love for and about myself.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Reinforce the Horse. We hope you all are doing well. Today's a little different. Dad and I are going to have a conversation about these past couple months. Because, Dad, you went on a nice adventure. You want to tell us where you went?
Oh, so we're just like jumping right in.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I spent the month of October. I took a trip to India.
India? What was the catalyst to you going to India?
You sound excited like you didn't know that I was there for the whole month.
Well, I mean, I'm well aware that you were there for a whole month, but maybe our listeners are curious as to why you decided to go to India instead of, say, Australia or another country in the world.
Oh, yeah. So it's a long story. I guess it started with, well, let me go like way back, actually, probably about a decade. I was hosting another podcast called Get Fit Friday. And one of my first guests on that podcast, which I ended that podcast a long time ago, so it's not still running. But one of my first guests, her name was Trisha Devney, and she's a sound healer. So she uses and plays the crystal harmonic bowls. Prior to connecting with her, I knew nothing about meditation. I knew nothing about really getting outside of the mind and body. I knew nothing about spiritual practices other than like going to church on Sunday as a, rather fundamental Christian growing up. And so to have this lady sitting in the recording studio telling me how she essentially had a chronic illness. I think it was a form of hepatitis, but I can't recall for sure. But she had started listening to and then subsequently playing these crystal harmonic bowls and essentially healed herself through that process and then became a professional musician as a result.
That's absolutely incredible. And so Trisha's experience in healing through these crystal bowls helped you in a lot of ways. I know you and I have discussed this, but correct me if I'm wrong, but she was your like catalyst into meditation.
Yeah, so she gave me a 2-minute sample clip of her music, and I'll be real, like when I was interviewing her and some of the stuff that she was saying, I thought she was off her rocker. I just thought she was. I didn't believe in any of the stuff that she was saying. Let's put it that way. Like she's a very incredible lady, very smart and intelligent, and but my past conditioning caused me to totally discount everything that she was telling me. So I didn't believe it. So I took the 2-minute clip that she provided me, and right after she left, so I had the recording studio in a separate bedroom in our house, if you remember that. And so I took the clip, and it was just online. So I had my phone plugged in some headphones, went and lay down in bed and played the 2-minute clip. And I had no expectation for it. I just kind of laid there and breathe. I didn't even know how to breathe at the time. I guess there's more to come in that discussion. But when the 2 minutes was over, I opened my eyes and I felt like I had this extreme brain upgrade. It felt like it felt like somebody came and did like a power wash in my brain. And I remember just thinking like, that's really interesting. It wasn't long after that experience that I came across Hal Elrod's book called The Miracle Warning. And we'll post links to that book. I think it's a book that you should read even, and in fact, I've actually been thinking about reading it again. It's just kind of a really cool program that you can go through and do on a morning basis each day, which I kind of have incorporated into my life. And it's become more or less a function of my life ever since then. After reading Hal Elrod's book, I was quickly like, these things just started appearing. And so the next thing that came up was the Headspace app.
The Headspace app's been pretty legit. I remember after you started that, you would sit down with Jacob and I in the living room at night before bed, and we'd have tea and we'd all listen to a Headspace guided meditation. That was the beginning to meditation in my life. That's like the earliest memory I have of meditation. But can you expand on how it impacted your life?
So Headspace was like a profound portion of my life. I can't say for sure how I originally stumbled on it. I think it just came up through an advertisement that AI served me. And I want to say that I was like one of the first subscribers to it. It was like a real new platform back then. And I remember going through the basics and having that same brain upgrade feeling that I had with the crystal bowl sounds. And I guess you could say it just started to open up a whole new dimension of life and being to me. And so to add some context to like what I was going through at the time, this was circa 2014, and your mom and I had just divorced after nearly 14 years of marriage. And those 14 years of marriage were pretty horrible for the both of us. I mean, we did have some good times, I suppose, but largely, I was a military member, and I cast a lot of blame on that to the military. But really, the crux of the whole issue back then for me was, I had no love for myself, and I had no self-worthiness. I felt unworthy of being alive, essentially. And what I have learned as of late, and so that was like, almost a decade ago, um, I've just this past year learned how to love myself. And even just like 9 months ago, if those words were to flow out of my mouth, they would have made me feel really uneasy and almost have a panic attack just by like thinking about that idea. And now I'm sitting here with more love about myself and thus others, and really this entire existence, than I ever have in my entire life.
That is absolutely beautiful. So, we've talked about in the past that you were diagnosed with a form of leukemia back in 2017. And after diagnosis, you felt very sick. You would describe feeling like you were moving through tar, like you always felt nauseous, you always felt sick all the time. Did that cancer illness help you decide to go to India and ultimately get you where you are now?
Yeah, so I suppose I should go ahead and fill in some of that story. So from 2014 to 2019, let's just say I dabbled in the meditation process. And really, for that half decade, I was very much physically active. So the way I believe our life and our existence here on this planet is that we have the mind, we have the body, and we have the soul or the spirit. And those three things, it's best if they form like this tight integrated triangle. And in geometry, the triangle is like one of the, if not the strongest structures in geometrical design. And so if either one of those three things are like too long or too short, or they aren't holding their weight and they're not doing what they're supposed to, that whole geometric design, that structure collapses. And so between 2014 and 2019, I was very much, it's like my body was overcompensating for my lack of soul, and also my mind was overcompensating. So like my soul was just like this little tiny speck. It wasn't even like a long uh strong board, so to speak. It was just like a speck of sawdust, really. And my mind and body were overcompensating for that. So if you could remember, Alyssa, I put a lot of emphasis on physical exercise, and I mean to the extreme, really. And I was also a very, very forward-thinking, analytical mind.
Sounds a lot like me.
Yeah, well, the saying goes, apples don't fall far from the trees.
Right.
I didn't acknowledge or know any of that. I was just kind of like going with the flow of things. And as you remember, in 2017, we took a road trip around the country, which was a pretty profound moment in my life, because what it amounted to is that I had to let go of about half of my income stream that I had at the time. I had to kind of like take a leap of faith in knowing that I don't know what was calling me on a road trip. It was just more something was calling me like to go out and explore and to do some traveling. When I made that decision, it was kind of like a point of letting go and kind of turning off the analytical mind a little bit and turning up the soul. And I didn't really realize that until actually quite recently. What I've come to find out is that disease like cancer or any other disease, chronic or acute, um, is often, if not the majority of the time, linked to these imbalances in our systems. And this isn't something that I just kind of arbitrarily came up with. And, I'm not smart enough to figure that out, I don't think. Um, but the idea has actually been taught for thousands of years in all different types of ancient teachings. So for me, what came forward for me and resonated with me has been yoga. Yoga to many people, especially Western Americans, might just, when you hear the term yoga, you might think just like exercises and stretches and kind of weird body postures and positions. There's so much more to it. In fact, the body positions and stretches and stuff and exercises are just a fraction of what yoga really is. The way I understand yoga is it means union. That's how it kind of translates to English. And it's the union of the knowledge, I guess, of knowing that you're not the body and the mind, and that there's something outside of that that you can ultimately connect with.
That's really cool. I, for one, haven't done an intense amount of yoga. I've done a little bit. And I suppose I don't even know if I could really say that what I've been learning is yoga, but I I don't know. It's just the sitting and connecting with the soul is ultimately what I hear you saying, is that this was a turning point for you to help your body and your mind connect with your soul.
Yeah, I mean that's how I understand it. And it's been such a profound awakening for me, this whole yoga experience. And I think your original question was, how did I wind up going to India, right? I mean, that's what we're ultimately getting
Yeah,
to.
that's where we're heading with this conversation.
Yeah. So I guess you could say India has been calling me. Uh, yeah, pretty much my whole life. And I'm not the first one that I've known that has expressed that sort of feeling and idea. In fact, there's a lot of people from all over the planet that kind of have that sort of yearning to go to this particular country.
We just visited with someone on the podcast. I think this was Jordana who said she was called to part in Australia, was it?
Oh yeah, yeah. And so there's like plenty of stories that I've heard. So that's Jordana Onawalt. She was a guest on episode number 43 that we just released recently. Fantastic interview with her. So yeah, people tend to be called to different locations, geographic locations, as part of their journey on this planet and what they're to experience. Now, to provide a little bit more context around this idea to travel around the globe to India, for me, it was so outside of the box of what I was willing and able to do. Um, that the fact that I actually went and now I'm back after that trip is just, it's still mind blowing to me. There's just so much involved in this whole, like, how do you want to, how do you want to take that?
Well, we heard a little bit about how your meditation story began and a bit more on your cancer journey. Back in March, you went to Sadhguru's inner engineering. What was it? The initiation of sorts? Because you did the inner engineering online for 7 days. And then in March, you went for a few days. Tell us more about that and the experiences you had there.
Yeah. So, uh, Sadhguru, he's a modern yogi mystic, and he heads a foundation or organization called Isha. And so he's got an ashram or yoga center in Coimbatore, India. It's in South India. And he's also got another um, ashram yoga center in Tennessee. And then he's got, smaller locations all over the globe. And so he created a course he calls Inner Engineering. So as you can tell with the title of that, it it doesn't have anything to do with yoga. It doesn't have anything to do with spirit. It doesn't have anything to do with religion. Um and to me, I think it's a fascinating way that he has gone about to touch people like me. Inner engineering. Engineering is a very analytical term. Uh and I know when something is properly engineered, like going back to that triangle idea, when the triangle is properly engineered with the correct materials and the correct connectors, that triangle is going to be extremely strong. And so that's engineering. When engineering comes together perfectly, you have a really great strong structure that's going to last and stand the test of time. So it was another AI service. Sadhguru popped up in my YouTube feed at one point, and I think this was roughly about this time last year. So we're recording right now. It's the end of November, 2000 or 2023, and so I stumbled across Sadhguru sometime around the same time and back in 2022. So it's been maybe a year ago. And so I went through his inner engineering online course, which at the time was 90 minutes a day for 7 days. Even prior to that, I was watching a lot of YouTube videos that he has on YouTube. Nearly every night I'd watch one for at least a couple weeks, maybe longer. And most all of his teachings were just like clearly resonating with me, and I was feeling it. And at the time I wasn't practicing yoga. I didn't even know what yoga was, and I still don't. I want to be real. Like we could go into like a definition of like what is yoga, and you know, mystics like Sadhguru and the yogis, they can break it down really well. Um, but it's not like I understand it. Like it's not a conceptual thing. It's to me it's much more spiritual, and it's it's kind of like using the lotus flower analogy, where that lotus flower goes into the mud and it comes out the next day and it's clean, and then it goes back down in the mud and it comes out clean, and over again. And to me, whether it's yoga or other practices like qigong or just whatever it might be, even religious practices, those are that's kind of the important part, is to know that like we don't know. There's so much that we don't know, and like when we think that we know something, we really truly don't. Sadhguru popped into my YouTube feed. I watched his program and then did the online inner engineering program. That was just in the comfort of the of home. And then he had a program he called Inner Engineering Completion, which is an initiation into a particular yoga practice called Shambhavi Muamaja Kriya. And it's a Kriya yoga. So, as I understand it, it's talking about inner action. And it's a powerful 21-minute process that you do daily. And so at the time, he offered that online, and I had signed up for the online portion, but I kept getting these like intuitive hits of, Jason, you just need to go in person and experience this program in person. And it was really funny how that worked out. I was reading a book at the time, and I can't remember what book it was, but the book had some mention of like La Jolla, California in it. I remember that. And when I went to register for the Inner Engineering Completion program, I was looking on their website and typing in like Arizona, and like nothing could be found. Nothing could be found anywhere. But what was pre-populated in the choices was La Jolla, California. And I thought that was a really interesting kind of, at the time, I kind of believed in coincidence. And so I was like, wow, that's just kind of an interesting coincidence. I've since dropped the word coincidence out of my vocabulary, and I call it like really divine synchronicity. And so I spent probably about 2 weeks going into that website every day or so on different devices, and just seeing like, did something else pop up close to my area? And it kept populating La Jolla, California. No matter what I did, refresh the page, incognito window, it didn't matter. La Jolla, California kept popping up. So, and I don't know, Alyssa, if you remember when I had talked about that.
Yeah, and at first I kind of remember it being a, oh, I might go to this thing, but we didn't start really talking about it until after, or I think until just like a week or two before you actually left. Because you were talking about all these synchronicities that you're talking about. I mean, the one book that mentioned La Jolla, California, and a couple YouTube videos that you were watching, and you said you had heard seashells and beach and waves and stuff that was, it just was California like. And so it was ultimately, you asked me, hey, should I go to this? Are you okay if I go to this? I was like, well, yeah, it seems like all the things are telling you to go to this. And eventually you went to this.
Yeah. So, a little bit more context that way. Um, as most of you listeners might know, in 2019, we relocated from the city to 10 acres of raw land, nothing but dirt and grass. And we proceeded to build a house and a farm. So from 2019 to the end of 2022, I had been on this property 24/7, 365 days a year. I didn't leave. Plenty of my family members called me a hermit. And I think largely I was trying to kind of escape. At first, I thought I was trying to escape people. But what I came to find out is that I was really trying to escape myself. And I got into a pretty dark space. And this all kind of relates around lack of love for myself. The cycles of anxiety and depression were incredibly strong. And, medicating and having side effects from that, and just just not in a good space of life and all through COVID and all that. So to think about traveling, even though it's only about a 6-hour drive to where we were in San Diego, California, to think about traveling to go to a 2-day yoga retreat with perfect strangers was just something that, like, my mind and body were totally kind of revolting against. But I remember, my meditation practice had kind of increased toward the end of 2022. I essentially graduated from Headspace because I dove back in, and it was like Headspace just kind of it's a great app. I recommend it for people, but it just wasn't doing it for me anymore. And I got got the idea that there was something more, that I needed to do something different, perhaps. And not long after that, that's when I stumbled on Sadhguru. And in the meantime, between completing inner engineering and waiting to go to San Diego, I had been doing a Kriya yoga practice, a Kriya meditation that he teaches. It's called Isha Kriya. I'll tell you, the first time I did that meditation, it actually scared me because of so much prior conditioning that I had about these things. And like, I felt really uneasy. I almost had a panic attack from it, but I decided to kind of lean into it and keep doing it. I did it every day as prescribed. And it, along with inner engineering, just changed my life. And so finishing inner engineering and scheduling to go to California to the completion program, there was some time involved in that. And I think I went to that in February. I think you probably remember more than
You went to that in March.
It was in March. Okay.
It's like the mid-March.
Okay. So yeah, so I went to inner engineering completion in March. By the time I went to that program, I was really excited to go. I remember the first morning I walked up, I was sitting on a bench, and I was the only one there. I was like the first one there in the morning. And this guy walked up, and he had his yoga mat and stuff. So like I knew like he was there for the same thing. It was really interesting. He was a really nice guy. His name was Gary, and that happens to be my dad's name. And then as we go inside and like we get situated and sit, they had assigned seatings. And so Gary was on my right, and then to my left was a guy named Jason. So I just thought like the synchronicities of like Gary and Jason, and I'm kind of like observing, I'm like in the middle of these two. It's just the names, and but it was synchronistic for me. It was like a pat on the back of saying like, you're here for a purpose. And it really resonated with me that way. So I really leaned into that. And prior to going to that, I had jumped out of an airplane from 13,000 feet.
You jumped out of an airplane from 13,000 feet.
Yeah, that was something that I definitely wasn't thinking about in my early 40s to just go do. I came out of a meditation one morning, and it was like, I got this, it was a message in my head. Like the voices in my head said, go skydiving.
I want to backtrack a bit. This was back in February of this year. So this is 2023. This is about a month before you went to this inner engineering initiation in La Jolla, California. You and I have talked a lot about the significance of this skydiving trip for you. I I am 17, was 17 at this point, so I couldn't do this with you. You were on your own. You did this with perfect strangers. Talk about your experience with this, but especially the spiritual significance to this skydive journey.
So this skydiving trip was 100% spiritual. And in fact, I paid for the videographer to jump with me so I could have pictures and a video. And at the beginning, she asked, "So, like, are we celebrating anything today?" And I said, "Life. I'm just celebrating life." Um, Now, so I guess we got to backtrack a little bit more, like back to November. And this is actually the first opening chapter to the memoir I'm writing called From Horseback to the Himalayas. And so the opening chapter in that book is about the process that you and I went through last Thanksgiving, where um, you, Alyssa, you disappeared from my life kind of abruptly. And we won't get into the details there, but um, we kind of had a bit of a falling out in our relationship. And we both were kind of dealing with our own individual skeletons in the closet, if you will. And so not long after that, I was at such a low point in my life, and dealing with cancer and feeling physically ill on the daily. Like you were talking about, I mentioned often that I felt like I was dragging a dead body, my dead body, really. It's kind of like, I know that's a morbid thought, but it felt like I was dragging my dead body through a tar pit. And that's how, like, every single day of my life felt. And I remember at some point in December, I looked up at the sky and I said, "Cancer, just take me." And that was like the lowest point I've ever been in my entire life. Now, I wasn't like, I didn't have a plan, like a suicide plan, like, I'm going to go and try to kill myself some particular way or form. But I was kind of using cancer as that method, it's just, I, I no longer wanted to exist on this planet, and I didn't see or feel any purpose in my existence. And I just gave in to cancer and the illness and the disease. And I knew at that point that I wasn't going to be alive for another year. I just, it, it rang so true in my being that I wasn't going to be alive another year.
That your cancer journey to me is fascinating because you've seen, I believe, both extremes of it. You've seen the extreme where it's there, you're done with it, you're done with life, very passively suicidal, just kind of waiting to die. And you've seen the incredible enlightenment and awakening that comes from diving within. And I've heard you say a number of times to me personally, I'm healed from cancer. I don't have cancer anymore. Um, Cancer seems like such a big catalyst. I mean, it's such a huge thing in your life. You've lived with it for years, I think even before diagnosis, and it's a journey. Like, you've been on this journey with cancer. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that and how you ultimately made the decision to heal instead of die with it?
That's a really, really good question, and a really, um, I have to take a moment to kind of gather my thoughts on that. I think this goes back to my military experience and military training, um, which by the way is another struggle that I had, and it's all linked to the lack of worthiness and self-respect, and definitely lack of love for myself. I don't think I'm the only one when it comes to a military veteran. I found myself often getting quite annoyed when people say thank you for your service. Not so much anymore, but I never really saw myself as like a military veteran. And I most certainly have never seen myself as a combat military veteran, but by definition, I am. So to contract an illness that is likely due to exposures, environmental exposures in the war theater, it adds a certain layer of complexity to life. Yeah, I guess I just had to really grapple with the idea that it was my life, and to really come to terms with that. And for all intents and purposes, I had a really easy experience in the military. And to some extent, that makes things worse from a analytical perspective, because it kind of has forced me to cover up the trauma that I did experience. And I think to all my uh, veteran brothers and sisters out there, like, just we experience so much trauma just by joining the military and going through initial basic military training or officer training uh, that we're subjected to. I mean, it's a very traumatic experience, and that's barring having to go to war or deploy or anything like that during the course of your career. So what I'm getting at there is, when I was diagnosed with leukemia, I'd like to say that it didn't do anything to me, or it didn't have an impact. But what was really going on is I internalized that impact. I basically told myself carry on with the mission, but I didn't know what the mission was at the time, and that's part of the problem. Like, my mission was non-existent because I had no love for myself, so I couldn't love others. So what am I doing in this existence? Like, what is my mission? What is my purpose? And so cancer came in, and I had journaled about this quite extensively I mean, over the past year, I've had multiple journal entries about this thing called cancer. And I remember one that comes to mind. It was something like, cancer isn't trying to kill me, it's trying to teach me. And whether I live or die, I've learned a number of powerful lessons. So when I got the idea or the intuition or the guidance, if you will, to go jump out of an airplane from 13,000 feet, it wasn't for the rush or an adrenaline spike or a physiological effect. While I did receive all of those as kind of icing on the cake, the main point of it was, and the how I was being spiritually guided into that, was to let go. And there was like this mantra that came up after I heard that, go skydiving. And I argued with it. It wasn't something like, oh, go skydiving. Yeah, I'm going to go. And I remember sharing that with you and the rest of the family at the time. And that was just like, kind of got an eye roll, kind of got some weird energy about it. Like, are you going through a midlife crisis, or what's going on? So that's back in January, February timeframe. And I had this let go mantra playing over and over in meditation, and even just kind of walking around doing my own thing. And I didn't really know what that meant until I jumped out of that airplane. And the moment I came out of that airplane, I still remember it as we're inching, and this is a tandem jump. So I've got, I'm strapped, or a guy is strapped to my back, and we're inching close to the door. And I had no fear. There was no fear.
Unless you go back and watch the video, there's like an inkling of fear right before you jump out of the airplane, and then right after you jump out of the airplane, and it's like, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing with my life? What am I doing with my life? Oh, everything's fine. And it was just like, yeah.
That's hilarious. Yeah, so the body and the mind like definitely were like, soul, what are you doing? What are you doing? But going up to the point of actually going out of that plane, there was no, I didn't feel any fear. I wasn't like holding on and like, oh, well, I don't think I could do this. There was no thoughts coming to mind. And I remember just as we kind of stepped out of the aircraft, I whispered to myself, let go. And the next almost minute was a free fall from 13,000 feet in the air. That free fall was so freeing in so many ways. It was a baptism of sorts. You know, I knew that there wasn't going to be any mechanical issues, or I knew this wasn't my death. I knew I was going to be just fine with it. And it turned out to be the greatest experience of my life to that point. You know, it was just like a really, really fantastic experience. And so I took that and I rolled into this inner engineering completion, this yoga initiation program in San Diego, California. As I sat in that program and we learned the whole process, you know, it's quite a process to learn these things. And so we're going through the first run through of the 21-minute program. We had learned the whole program and now we're going through the first time all the way through. And the energy in the room was so amazing. And I felt, I remember my brain going to like, I'm in California and for some reason I thought there was going to be an earthquake. That's how powerful I was feeling the energy. And so it was like the floor started vibrating around me. And then coming up through, you would say like my tailbone and kind of the root chakra and like all the 7 major chakras up my spine. And as it crossed through my solar plexus and then up to my face, once this energy got to my face, it was like a flashbang went off in front of my face and there was nothing but pure white light. It's not like a memory. It's more of just like an impression. It's like this happened. So yeah, it's in my memory banks, but as far as like time and space, like I just know like I didn't feel like I existed for a moment. And I let out a really loud yell. It's like ah for I mean my entire lung capacity. And that energy like burst through the crown chakra, so the top of my head. And however long it was, I mean, the whole process is only 21 minutes. So I'm guessing that whole process that I just described is probably only like seconds long. But I remember winding down and then eventually opening my eyes and coming back into my body, because it was an out of body experience. I was completely outside of my physical body. And I remember coming back into the body and like opening my eyes and like everybody was just completely normal. It's like I stepped into this alternate dimension for a brief moment and then stepped back into what we call reality. And it's like everybody was like business as usual. Nobody said anything. Like nobody was like, hey, or is everything okay? Now, they did warn us ahead of time of like going into these powerful sessions, like different people and different people's bodies and spirits and minds have different responses. So they did kind of warn us, and like if that happens and your neighbor's going through something, to just kind of let it go and be with it and just support them energetically. So I think that's what everybody was doing. But the way I chalked it up was that it just occurred in my imagination. I didn't even think it was real, including the yell. I was just like, that was just something that I must have ventured off into a deep meditation, and there was nothing to it. But it sat with me. And it wasn't until a couple of weeks after that I sent a message to Jason, the guy who's sitting next to me. I was like, "Hey, do you remember like me letting out a loud yell during the initial run through of the Korea?" And he's like, "Yeah, you were definitely like processing something, and wondered if you were okay for a minute," type of thing. So it was this whole process of letting go. I should say that on my way, or just it was like the week before I headed off to that program, I connected with a spiritual energy healer. She practices Reiki energy healing, amongst other things, like language transmissions and reorganization and stuff via that sort of modality. So her messages to me were so profound, and I won't get into the details on like what she shared with me in the session that I had with her. She did tell me that she was going to send me a Reiki session one day, and that was the Thursday that I was driving out to California. And it's like I remember when that happened, and it hit me as I was driving, and it gave me such an energetic burst, and kind of I felt it kind of opening me up to what was to come in that weekend. When I returned home from that program, I just reconnected with her, and I said, kind of what my experience was. And she mentioned that, it sounds like I had what was called a soul walk in experience. Now, that's a very metaphysical term where, soul A that you're born with decides to leave the body, but the body doesn't die. Soul B just comes in instead. And this has been known like all over the globe. There's thousands, if not tens of thousands or more stories of this. And a lot of it's like near death experiences, or like the experience that I had in that yoga center was what, from how I understand it, yoga would call it a Kundalini rising. No matter which way that you take it, or if you want to take the metaphysical route and maybe the soul did something or a new soul came in, what it comes down to is that I was a completely changed and altered being. I mean, even from a Christian perspective, which is where my childhood background stems from, a Christian would call this being born again. Of course, they would only call it so if it fell under the veil of calling upon Jesus to initiate that. So Jesus Christ. So otherwise they call it Antichrist. But all of these terms and phrases in my mind are the same thing. They're all leading to the same thing, and that's ultimately love. So the bright light that I saw around me was nothing but pure love. Just 100% love, consciousness, like beautiful. Can't imagine like anything better than that. I came out of that with a very profound, different sense and feel about life. And I know you can attest to that, Alyssa.
I will never forget the day you came back home from that. I remember there being so much different about your being. For one, like I think if I had more experience on people being high on something, I think I would have been like, "Hey dad, are you like high on something?" Cuz your eyes, like your whole being, like there was just something, and it wasn't wrong. Like there wasn't anything wrong with you. You were just so like blissful. You were high on freaking bliss and love. Like what is this? And it just, like I remember going up to you and being like, "How was it?" And you couldn't even answer me. Like you couldn't even answer me. And since then, I mean there's been various ups and downs, but I've noticed the way that we communicate is so much more, it's so much different and more effective, and your entire being shifted. And there was this sense of like, when you came back, you told me something. No, this was just months ago. We were in the car and you were like, "I always thought I was gonna die in my mid 30s, early 40s, and guess what? I did." And we were talking about this new soul walk-in that you actually gave a name, which maybe the listeners are curious about that experience as well. but it's just, I don't know. I think this new soul came into this body in which I remember and I know as my dad, and which maybe your brain sees as Jason, but it's its own thing. You are a completely different being. And because of that I feel like in a way that led you farther to go to India.
Yeah, and so, geez, there's a lot to touch on just with that. So let me kind of unpack a little bit. Um, the so first, the soul walking and the name that you mentioned was kind of a family joke, and so Selena, now my ex girlfriend, we just recently broke up not long ago, which is another aspect to this whole transformation that I've gone through. She has a Hispanic last name, and I had always thought that she was Hispanic, and just because of her last name. But she wound up doing like one of those like genetic testing, like 23andMe or something like that. And it turns out she has absolutely no Hispanic roots. And so I used to just give her a lot of crap about it, like because she would enunciate like Spanish words and accent, and it was just kind of a running joke, like that, and so she responded in her comedy with calling me Hassan instead of Jason, and that was just kind of a normal occurrence for her, just kind of poking fun at me for poking fun at her was what it was. And so when I got back and I had explained to her like that this energy healer suggested that I might have had a walk-in experience, a soul walk-in. And I read a book about it and I was like, man, this really kind of resonates with me. And it sounds like, and for the record, I don't care. I don't care if it was, I don't care if it wasn't. But it just resonates with me. It's really interesting. And so then Selena proceeded to call me Joaquin Soul. And um to just joke around and kind of poke fun at me about it. And that stuck. And so that's the name Alyssa's talking about. So, and we've just made it light and airy and kind of joked about it. In fact, there's a chapter in my book entitled Joaquin Soul.
There was also talk and rumor about maybe that being your what is it, a penship name, your author name.
Oh yeah, for the book we had joked around about having the pen name for the author of the book be Joaquin Soul. Anyway, so whatever happened that day, I it's like I totally altered paths from the suicidal, depressive, anxious, sick, downtrodden, lack of love self that I was, to this new self that was, it seemed like it was an overnight immediate thing, but if we reflect back on it, it was nearly, it was 9 years or so of various types of inner work and exploration and dealing with trauma and getting through things. And so it was a long time in the making. And arguably we could say it's been in the making my whole entire life, but definitely, within the past 9 years or so, almost a decade. And so as I was leaving the retreat, the yoga initiation, a guy ran up to me and he's like, Jason, I've got to talk to you, so don't leave. Like, do you have a few minutes? I was like, sure. And he looked at me and said, if you could make it happen, you need to go to India. And as he said that, this wave of energy just like blasted me. And it felt a lot like the blast that I got from the Reiki practitioner on my drive into San Diego. It felt real similar to that. It was definitely attention grabbing. So it pulled my interest, and I was like, okay, you got my attention. Like what's going on? And so he proceeded to tell me that he's a native Indian, not in a American Indian sense, but actually from India. And he said, a couple of years ago, I went I was living in the United States, but I went back home to basically be with my family to die. And what I gathered is that he had a brain tumor, and so some sort of brain cancer or something like that. And so he said when he was at his his family's home in India, his friends and family kind of coerced him to go to the Isha Yoga Center in Coimbatore, and he told me, he's like, I grew up in India. I know about these things, and he thought it was bullshit. Those were his words. He's like, this is bullshit. I'm not going to go. But he wound up going to just kind of satisfy his friends and family, to Isha Coimbatore. And so at the yoga center in Coimbatore, Sadhguru has consecrated a couple of spaces, in particular, um, one called a Sirakund, and I'm probably not going to pronounce these very well, but the Sirakund is a body of energetic water, and I don't really know all the details of how that is created and how it's made and what makes it so powerful. And I'll talk about more of that in a minute. And then there's also the Dalai Linga. It's a consecrated space and energy form, which you can classify it as a temple. It's basically what Sadhguru talks about being his life work on this in this current incarnation of his existence, was to consecrate that space. So this guy who reluctantly went to these spaces and like partook of them in their energy, his message to me was that 2 years later, he's now standing in front of me and he has a clean bill of health, and he's in San Diego, California, volunteering with Isha Foundation. And then he also said, like, we're not really even supposed to tell people this sort of stuff. So, um, I didn't even catch his name or what. So I namaskared him to him because he just felt led to tell me to go. And I couldn't, when that wall of energy of him telling me I needed to go to India, if I could make it happen, it was something that I couldn't ignore, but I tried to ignore it.
And if I remember correctly, India has been something we've been talking, especially you and me have been like talking about kind of jokingly on and off for since before you did the inner engineering thing. I remember hearing it come up around this time, before this time last year. Like it was just like it's kind of always been a thing in the back of our conversations, and I think in the back of your mind. It was one of those like, if you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go? And it was
Yeah,
India.
and I think a lot of that for me was just the Himalayas. So the draw to the Himalayas. So some background there, like you and I used to go out trekking and backpacking a lot in the wilderness and the mountains, and so the Himalayas were just something that like I just wanted to experience in life.
Would you say that like internal draw was more spiritual than anything? I mean, you've had it pretty much your entire life. Do you think that was more of a your spirit like calling you there, and not so much the physical, mental, like, oh, that would be cool to go on a backpacking
Looking
trip
back on it now,
kind of thing?
it was 100% spiritual,
That's so
and
cool.
in fact, so there's much more to that. So leaving the yoga retreat in San Diego, I remember driving back and I was listening to various podcasts, and these podcasts were like synchronistic to like everything that I had just experienced that weekend. Uh, One of them was talking about this term called collective effervescence, and there was just a number of different things like food and eating, and so there's all this stuff that was just like starting to reintegrate a new self. And me, Alyssa, like especially moving off grid and to the country was about like getting away from people, and like I'll be real, like a lot of times I said like, oh, I can't stand or I even hate people, like it just people annoy me or or statements like that. And then coming back from this orientation or this yoga retreat, it's just like filled with this like newfound love for existence and for human beings. And it started to fill me with love for and about myself. And I hadn't quite found that yet, but it was definitely like on its way. And so I remember it was like 2 or 3 weeks after I got home, I shot Jason a message and I was like, hey, well, first of all, do you remember that the first run of the program, did I let out a loud yell? And he's like, yeah, you did. You were definitely processing something, like I said. And then I was like, by the way, do you want to take a trip with me to India? And I, going into that, I was like hoping that he would say no and just like, absolutely not. You're crazy.
Wait. So let me get this straight. You went to okay. You went through an inner engineering course from a guru that is from India. You went to the initiation in La Jolla, California. You met a complete stranger who is now a pretty good friend of yours. And at the time, you're still like building your relationship. You don't really know him too well, but you invited him on a trip with you around the world to India.
Yeah. But
Great.
so I invited him because really what I was wanting him to say is like, no, can't do it. You know, like putting the ball back in my court of like, okay, because then I could have used that as like, well, who am I going to go with? I'm not just going to go to India by myself. Like that seemed like really, but he came back and he was like, yeah, when are you thinking? And so I was thinking the month of October and he's like, yeah, sure.
And I suppose there's also synchronicities that go into going on or in the month of October, right? Because your birthday happens to be October 1st. And prior to this trip, you were talking to a couple different people, and one off the top of my head, Denise, who brought up the trip over the month of your birthday.
Yes. So, oh man, you just opened up a whole nother can of worms. So, as is the case for everything in life, there's not just like one thing that's occurring at one time, you know? And this story of mine, shoot, we're already like over an hour into it. And it's just touching the very surface of like all the things that have gone on. Um, but yeah, thank you for mentioning. So I, I had been listening to for the past couple years now a podcast called Journey On with the great Warwick Schiller. And I say great because I believe so strongly he and I had like some sort of soul contract. He doesn't know about it. but but he's been so instrumental, just his work with the horses and then on his podcast, and everybody that he's brought on the podcast has been so instrumental to my own journey. And so one of the guests that he had on his show was named Denise Elizabeth Byron, and she's an astrologer who Warwick and his wife had met with years back. And so once I listened to Denise on his podcast, I just was like compelled to schedule a meeting with her and get like a astrological reading from her, a zodiac reading, I guess is called. See, I don't even know what these things are. Like, I just kind of go into them and I can't really even describe them. But so my interaction with Denise was such that we had 2 meetings together and they were spaced a couple months apart. So I think it was back in January or February that I met with her originally. And no, maybe it was March. I can't remember. No. It was January or February. And then it was again right after I got back from the yoga initiation. And so I had mentioned after I got back to her that I was planning on, or I was trying to plan to take a trip to India. And she basically, I can't remember exactly what she said, but she gave me like all the good feels about it. Like not only like astrologically is it a good time, energetically it sounds like the great thing to do, but she actually encouraged me to go for a whole month, because at the time when I had talked to her I was like, well, maybe I'll be gone a week or two, and she's like, well, I recommend it, yeah, if you go, like, go for at least a month. That's what she told me. And so I had originally just thought I would go spend a month at the ashram. And then what turned out is that we got word of this Himalayan pilgrimage, and it was through Isha Sacred Walks. And so we wound up going on an 11-day yatra. It's called a Himalayan pilgrimage up to Kedarnath in the Himalayas. And that whole process was the most profound transformation of my life, really.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack and uncover with that journey alone. How long was that trek
11
for?
days.
11 days. Okay. So there's a lot, and you had just mentioned when how before you went to India, you were drawn to the Himalayas, like it was one of those monuments, if you will, in the world that you were just drawn to. I don't even know where, like, what question to ask first, because I know there's a ton to go into. Where would you like to start with the Himalaya trek? Maybe at the airport when you met Jason there, because I don't actually know much about that.
Yeah, so Jason agreed. We wound up going through this like long process. I think we originally applied to go on this trek. Shoot, it was like April maybe. And I wasn't actually cleared 100% to go because of the medical issues until weeks before we were about to leave. And just the fact, like the scheduling and the timing of it was it just deciding to go on the walk and or the pilgrimage and then shuffling around like my ideas of what this trip to India was going to look like. It set me up for like such strong synchronicities, like people that I would ultimately like encounter and come across. And that's for a whole nother episode later on. But stepping off the or stepping out of the airport in New Delhi was, it was shocking. And it was, yes, there was the typical culture shock, like driving on the other side of the road. The driving that they do there is like completely different than what we see in America and other parts of the world. The skill required in their driving is like off the charts. But then there's this total juxtaposition for me of like having traveled around the world to, and what I really thought I was getting myself into was a serene, peaceful, calm environment in the Himalayas. And when you step out of the airport in New Delhi, I mean, you're in like one of the most polluted, populated cities of the world. And so naturally, like it's not serene and it's not beautiful and it's not uh tranquil or anything like that. It's the exact opposite. I actually am like really kind of sensitive to air pollution and stuff like that. And I had worn a mask, not for COVID so much, but just my health condition at the time and like just being a little bit more cautious that way. But the mask I had on was actually like an air filtration mask. So it like really, really helped me the whole time that we're like traveling up the mountain. Why I mentioned that is because there was just so much that was drawing me back to the war theater in Iraq. From the moment that I walked out of the airport, you know, for those of you that are unaware, I deployed into Iraq circa 2008, and I was actually stationed at one of the worst environmental locations that they later marked as one of the worst environmental locations uh, of the entire like Iraqi war. And so we had plumes of billowing smoke, toxic smoke that were just running almost 24/7. And so the interesting thing about the Himalayas are all spiritual. Like, just I've been around a lot of mountain ranges in my lifetime, and I've done a lot in nature. There's nothing like the Himalayas. They have this sort of like living, breathing personality about them that you can't I can't even grasp onto it, and I can't explain it. And I've joked around to you and others like really that whole 11 days, really the whole month for me in India was like a month-long psychedelic trip. When it comes to that experience, it was just so drawing me back to the throes of Iraq and purging out trauma that I didn't even know that I had that was within my body. And I remember being so angry about the pollution, and that pollution was this, or that anger was the same anger that I had when I was in Iraq, and I was trying to, as a lowly staff sergeant in the United States Air Force, trying to scream at the top of my lungs, so to speak, like, what we're doing here is wrong and it's making people sick. And uh and I said at the time in 2008, hell, we're all going to get cancer, you know. And so that's what I was met with coming into India. And then again, like, the pollution, and that reminded me of all the trash and stuff that was being burned in Iraq. And we're in these buses that in Iraq, they were all over the place, these buses, and that's what we rode in, this same type of buses.
Oh, that's not synchronistic at
No,
all.
no, not at all. The bus ride, I mean, we were in the bus, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14-hour days, sometimes more than that. All of the things were just like bringing up the war zone. And I had mentioned to Jason a number of times that I felt like I was in the war theater, and I felt like I was at war or in a war zone again. And so I was dealing with some really heavy stuff. I didn't know the horses were going to be joining me on that trip, or equines for that matter. But I think it was like 2 days before we started the journey, we were told about these ponies, that's what they called them, ponies, that would be available to assist us during the trek up to Kedarnath. It's a 18-kilometer trek. I can't recall like how much altitude you're gaining in 18 kilometers, but it's a lot. And you know me, I've done a lot of trekking. The trek up to Kedarnath is pretty intense. I mean, it's doable for most people, but it's paved in cobblestone and concrete. So they use these, quote, ponies. They're not actually ponies, they were mules. We were told, okay, like, for time purposes, and we don't know what the weather's going to be like and such and so forth, like, everybody's going to essentially ride the pony. That's what they told us. And as we sat there that night and we were given those instructions, like, my heart just completely sunk. I was at such a I was dealing with so much internally and spiritually, emotionally, physically even. And then to be told that I'm going to have to mount an equine and ride it up an 18-kilometer trek was just, it was too much for me to take in. And so we left really early the next morning, and we got up to, they called it the pony point, where all these mules were waiting to be mounted to ride this 18-kilometer trek. And I remember becoming so emotional. Like, I just felt these hundreds of mules and all of their pain. It just flooded me. I wound up following the rules, so to speak, and mounted this particular mule. I asked her first, and she totally shut down. She gave me like no response. But we only took a few paces, and there were actual, like, some of the mules like collapsed, like when the riders got on. The riders didn't know what they were doing, or a combination of not knowing what they were doing, and the mules not having the right footing and stuff like that. I wound up dismounting, and I hiked the majority of the trek up with my pack on my back, and I allowed the mule to walk alongside me. And along the way, I'm yelling at the handlers, these mule handlers, because they're carrying these bamboo sticks, and if the mules diverted one way or they weren't going fast enough, uh, they would hit them. They would hit the mules. They would crack them on the bend of the leg, or they would. Uh, I saw countless numbers of them hit them across the muzzle. So they were abused animals, and the idea for them is like to do 2 or 3 treks a day. And I suppose once they get all the way to the top, so there's like this sea of mules at the top, and I'm guessing that they rotate them in a way that they get a nice rest. But I don't know how. If they try to do even 2 a day, is like that's pretty much the day, by the time they go up and down. So I don't know what the total logistics are, but what I saw was devastating. And it really pulled in the equine aspect of my life into this whole story. And I alluded to the memoir that I'm writing, and it was about 2.5 months before I left for India that I was driving down the road and a title for the book came to mind. It just popped into my mind. It was just From Horseback to the Himalayas. It just sort of fit, and I didn't really know why until I got to the Himalayas and the equine presence there, and then everything that we have experienced, you and I, Alyssa, with the horses in our lives, and from Mocha all the way through Cody and Willow and Grace and everything in between, and Reinforce the Horse and Willow Paints and all of it. It just started to draw all these things together. And I remember getting up to the temple at Kedarnath. Up at that site, it's like a base camp. So there's a lot of tents and there's a lot of trash and refuse along the pathways and stuff. It's not well kept. And there's a hotel, but it's probably, I would say, maybe a quarter of a star hotel, so it's like a very austere condition up there. And we're walking around the hotel building, and they also have a helipad up at the top. So they cart people who don't want to make the trek up. You can take a helicopter from the lower point and skip the 18-kilometer trek and just take a helicopter ride. And so they have these helicopters going like bees back and forth, And so those particular helicopters have a certain sound to them. And as we were walking, I was like, I got this like really, my body just felt really anxious and really like out of sorts. And I was talking to Jason, and I had been pretty anxious that whole time, and just with everything going on. So there was a lot of like anxiety, and I'm feeling like really horrible because I had come into this India trip without any anxiety, and I come from, inner engineering and completion, and I'm feeling all great and doing meditation and kicking anxiety and depression out of my life. But yet here I am on the other side of the planet at the top of the Himalayas, feeling anxious and agitated and aggravated, and why am I here? And as I heard this sound, I had these feelings physiologically in my body. And I remember saying to Jason, I was like, I feel like I'm in a war zone. And as we turned the corner, I looked up, and there was an Indian Air Force Chinook helicopter that was inbound. And it was actually transporting some steel or something. They were doing some construction up there. But the Chinook helicopter has a very distinct sound. And I had multiple occurrences on Chinook helicopter and around Chinook helicopters in Iraq. And so it was just this whole like experience. And that afternoon, I went and sat just outside of the temple at Kedarnath, And that same message coming out of the airplane just hit me like a ton of bricks, and it was just like, let go. And I closed my eyes and I leaned into that once more, and I got lost at the temple in Ketterneth. Like I was completely gone for a period of time, and it started reorganizing and reshaping, um and I had a sense of understanding, at least in part, as to why I had made that journey in the first place. We were there for the next day, I think, and then headed back down and had some profound moments. Uh, Most notably for me, around the Ganges River was really amazing. And then the whole yatra ended up. So the 11 days is done, and I'm feeling just really pretty horrible altogether.
I want to backtrack just a bit because I think it was on October 7th, on the Himalaya trek, while you were on the Himalaya trek, I was riding Willow. I was here with me and Selena. Selena was inside the house, and I had taken Willow out. As many of you probably know, I don't ride Willow with a saddle. I don't ride her with a much of anything on her nose either. So she had her neck rope on, and we were riding, and I fell off of Willow, and I dislocated my right elbow, and that was completely my fault. What happened was we'd been walking, and I had cued her to trot, and she had already looked at something off in the distance. Her full attention wasn't on me, and clearly my full attention wasn't on her. So with the rise in my energy, it spooked her because she wasn't expecting it, and she threw me off, and or didn't throw me off. She spooked and moved to her left quickly, and I came off, or moved to her right. No, okay, I'm sorry. She moved left, and I came off and fell on my right elbow and landed on the ground and found myself in the ER. And that was a moment I don't think I'll ever forget. But there was that, and Dad was talking to me the day after that happened about what you guys were up to uh, on the bus coming down from the Himalayas. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So yeah, that was a really amazing synchronistic moment. So here I am on the other side of the planet on this trip that I had been planning for months before leaving, and just as I leave, and this is also another aspect of bringing me back to the trauma that I needed to release from my military experience. Because in the military, when you're preparing to deploy, you're taught so much about like Murphy's law, really. Like when things can go wrong, they do. And like in the case of a military deployment, when you leave your family behind, just we were taught to just kind of anticipate something negative happening, and to just kind of roll with that. And I think I even had that discussion with you before I headed off to India. And so here I am. I get this text message from Alyssa that she came off Willow, and she's okay, but she's had a dislocated elbow and whatnot. And so I think it was like maybe the day after that, we're on the bus, and I'm seated synchronistically next to two radiologists. They're medical doctors, they're radiologists. And so I think radiologists, that's what their primary job is, to read x-rays and different types of imaging, medical imaging. And so I found that quite synchronistic, just that alone. And so I shared, of course, on a cell phone screen, but I shared a picture of the Alyssa's X-rays with them, and both of them were like, "Well, there's a slight fracture, it looks like, and definitely a dislocation, and they'll need to reset it, and they'll probably cast it, and she'll probably be in a cast for 4 to 6 weeks. And so I was like, okay, well, that's great. And so I just got this this desire, this prompting on the bus. And now we're I think there were 22 people on our bus, and by that time we're like family. And I mean, we're all in this together. We're all there for our own particular personal reasons, but the overarching reason in all of our minds is just the love of life and people and spirituality and our existence and exploring that. And so I got this prompting to just kind of, hey everybody, like can we have like a moment of silence or a meditation or something for my daughter who came off her horse and dislocated her elbow. She's doing fine otherwise. And so right away, like they're like, yeah, we'll do a chant to Devi. And Devi is a feminine goddess, I guess you could say. I don't even know how to like articulate this stuff. Like, but there's this particular chant. It's beautiful. It's in Sanskrit, and all 22 of us, like we chanted this chant, and if nothing else, at minimum, like at the end of that, I just felt so much peace, and I was just like, everything's fine, everything's okay. There's no need to like get anxious about this or whatever. And the result was, I mean, if we cut to the chase about that, was that it turned out there was no fracture, or the fracture healed and disappeared. And then just after coming home, this was just a couple weeks ago, we go to your orthopedic doctor, and he's like amazed that you healed as quickly as you did. And so whether it was the chant to Davy or some of the other energy healing work that you've been doing with somebody, or just your own mindset and your own ability to heal, who knows? But it's fun nonetheless to think about.
Yeah, and it's been a fascinating journey. I mean, it's like while Dad was in India going through his own healing and inner journey, rather, I was back at home going through my own journey of healing and asking for help and just having to go through all of that. But yeah, no, the arm was pretty much stuck at my side for a good few weeks, and now I have full extension of it. I do things with it. I'm just working on building the strength as far as stuff goes. So doing much with the horses as far as the wheelbarrow and the hay goes. I do need a bit of assistance there, but there's nothing a nice sitting and loving on Willow, Grace, and Cody can't fix.
Yeah, and so that was just like a really amazing just experience for me, and just something that allowed me to relax. If nothing else, the chant and just having that collective effervescence with those people in that bus just allowed me to relax and know that everything was going to be okay. And then I left that experience from New Delhi, and I flew down to Coimbatore. And I felt like on the plane that I was coming down with a cold, and I was just feeling out of sorts. And so I was due to start a program. I think it was on the 17th of October, and I had gotten to the ashram on the 13th. So I had a few days before starting. Maybe it was the 18th of October I was supposed to start.
Is this the Ayurvedic program that you're talking about?
Yeah. So the way I understand it, it's called Bendi than Ayurveda, but it was called Ayurrasayana, an intensive program that is basically just about rejuvenating the body and the mind and the spirit. And so it's all about rejuvenation. And I had chosen that program really just because it was really the only one that was available for the time that I was going to be there. and also because of the leukemia, I thought like, having some practice that way and maybe learning some stuff about more stuff about food or stuff that I could do on a regular basis. And the program was really good. I enjoyed the program. Um, but it's more so I enjoyed like the people that I met. And so it was a group program. I think there was like 25, 28 of us or something in the program. And it was only, I think it was 4 or 5 days long from start to finish. And I learned some like I learned another yoga exercise technique that I've been practicing now daily, and it's that's been really helpful. But when I first arrived at the ashram, I was getting sick, and then like the first 2 or 3 days, like I just kind of quarantined myself in my room and really didn't do anything. I just slept, and but I don't I I just had a minor cold, and I don't even think it was a virus or an illness. It was just like my body was so kind of worn down from all of the energy that moved through it the past 11 days, and all the travel caught up to me, and I remember rolling into the Ayurveda program, and like the first 2 days I was like not in it. Like I really didn't even want to be there, and I was having second thoughts about like, why am I in this, why am I here, and what am I doing, and I'm kind of missing home. And Selena and I had just broken up like in August, and here it is October, so I'm like questioning like my decision to do that. And just kind of like my whole world was feeling like it was crumbling a bit. I was worried about you and your elbow, after even the Davy chant, and like feeling okay about it, and like having some sense of calm. Like, I don't know, those first couple days at the ashram were really difficult for me. But then I had this moment of like peace, and it had to do with it really was the program just kind of brought me back in and got me out of my head and back into spirit. And then I remember the first time that I went and um, took a dip in the Sirakund, and I can't explain that was, for me, that was like the most liberating and cleansing experience with water, especially that I've ever had ever in my life. It was just like the power in that place was otherworldly.
And you're not typically one to really enjoy water very much, are you?
Correct. Like prior to like swimming has not really been like my favorite thing to do. Now, I did go scuba diving back when I was your age, and I loved that. But just to like dip in a pool or something like that, not really my thing. I'm gonna usually pass on that. But that's also changed. That's like a change that I've felt like, so I'm more interested in water. It's really kind of an interesting thing, which I don't think I've told you about that. Um but this experience was like cleansing, and there's this waterfall that's in the pool, and you just stand under it, and it's like this cleansing energetic water that is just so incredibly powerful. And it's not placebo. There's something going on with it. Like there's something about the elements that are going on with this space. And so, but I'm leaning into that, and I'm just continuing that mantra of just let go. And like, it's like the book that I'm writing for the children's book, the Hasta la Vista Leukemia. And I'm just like saying, Hasta la Vista, goodbye, leukemia, as I'm in this pool. And it's just, and then you get out of the pool and you walk across the campus to the Dalalinga, and that space, just waiting to go into that space, you can feel like I dropped into a very deep meditative space, just waiting to go inside. And so I could talk for hours and hours upon just what I experienced sitting within that space. But so I spent a total of about 3 weeks at the ashram, and my life will never be the same. And I'm sitting here right now and I'm like full of bliss and exuberance and joy and love. And I don't have cancer in my body anymore. And I could like, and Alyssa, like it's been like, oh, I don't think I have cancer, but I don't have cancer in my body anymore. And I don't have that backed up by like a blood test yet. I think that's forthcoming. But like my lymph nodes, particularly in my left armpit, was starting to enlarge a good amount. At least I thought so. And I could no longer like I could only feel it little. It's like it's almost to its normal size. And the ones in my neck, uh, I was starting to be able to feel those, and they're normal. And so leukemia clogs up the lymphatic system, and I'm sitting here right now and I don't have cancer.
That's so cool. Like that makes me really happy. It makes me really happy.
There's so much more to this story. And so
maybe we wrap it up and we do a part 2.
Yeah. Yeah, we could revisit a lot of it. And for you listeners, we appreciate you listening to this. If you made it this far, know that I am writing a book. It's forthcoming. I'm trying to get it published here within the coming year, at least maybe having a contract for publishing.
And I have a hunch here that if any or all of you are very interested in what we've been talking about, you will have a lot more detail in this book that is forthcoming about particularly dad's life and healing journey with the horses and going to India. And there's a lot more that one could put into writing in a book than two could talk about on a podcast.
Yeah, and so a lot of this story, of course, is going into the book, and much more. And for those of you listening, like if you're interested in any of the details of like some of the things and the processes that I've gone through, feel free to like shoot me a message, find me on social media, send us an email at podcast@reinforcethehorse.com. I'm more than happy to engage with you. This isn't about like becoming something for me. It's about sharing in a way. If I set out with this mission, is just if I could just help inspire one single person to heal themselves through the power of love for themselves and love for others and love for life, then I feel like my mission on this planet is complete with just that one single soul.
That's profound. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us all about your experiences. And maybe in part 2, we talk more about your experiences at the ashram and in India, and then the cruise ship following after.
Yeah.
There's a lot to discuss, you guys. There's a lot that went on the month of October and the first couple weeks of November. So it's been a journey, and there's a lot more future that's forthcoming for both of us and all of us as far as Reinforce the Horse goes, I feel like. And so stay tuned. Thank you so much. Namaskaram.
Namaskaram, and have a great day.